Hey, welcome to the TV channel, and today I'm going to give you this series tournament final game, which is the Bastion against the Magnolia. And the Bastion will begin first in this game, actually discarding, and I must say the right deck does add a lot of consistency for most deck, and it does give Bastion the best edge, I would say, because of the many great trees in the list. But we shall see how the game will flow first, but the Magnolia does go for the Crush Rush, as mentioned by the player who pilots it, basically rushing the opponent down, but the opponent does open a draw trigger here, which does, lessen the damage done. And discards one Grade 3 there to write to the Grade 2, which now he can reveal two Grade 3 in his hand to call the top card of his deck, which is the Grade 3 Counter Charger. And he does decide to swing at the rear guards here to actually clear off the aggression, which is actually a heads up move by him, as he's actually feeling the pressure from the Magnolia player. But Magnolia does have his own strong right deck mechanics, which is actually superior calling the top card of his deck. But he does unfortunately call a critical trigger there, but he does pump out more regards here. And do note that all Grade 2s in the current game are actually 10k base. So there's no such thing as a Force and an Excel whereby 10k and 9k is matters now, and everything is hitting for 10k. So actually it's quite a relief, or rather relief for rush players. And now we do see the Bastion player actually riding to his Grade 3 here, revealing his 3 Grade 3 in his hand to draw one card due to the Grade 2 on right ability. Now he's going to start the aggression here as he does call 2 Grade 3s only. Looks like this will be all the commitment he's going to do. He does swing in the Vanguard, and do know that Bastion does have a dry check ability, but he doesn't dry check any Grade 3 here, so he's not actually able to proc the ability, but he does go open a heal trigger, which is very lucky, especially against the Crush Rush Magnolia. As the Magnolia does begin his Grade 3 turn here, and he does go for the right deck, Superior Right, into the Magnolia himself with the Grade 2 ability. Is able to Superior call the top card of the deck into this Mantis, which does give plus 5k to the critical trigger there, and then Mantis will actually call again to give plus 5k to the Mantis, and this will be another wave of aggression. Twin driving into a critical trigger here, and be pumping to the critical trigger, so it'll be at least a 5k guard here. But do note that 5k guards are actually very annoying pokes, because do note that 5k guards are actually still one card in hand. So he does actually make the Bastion player throw 3 cards in total to guard. So damn, that's actually very strong, but he does go for his own personal right here, and this is where damage is going to be done. Do note that personal right do give 10k front row, and the units don't have to be present to actually witness the right. The 10k buff is actually a permanent buff on the field until end of the turn, which I must say I do prefer this over the markers we had in the series. He does call this Grade 3, which does actually allow your Grade 3 to be boosters, similar to Melodies in V series. So technically this is just Bermuda but wearing armor. So the aggression continues, and do note that those columns are actually 30ks, but he does direct check to 2 blanks, but the Bastion ability will start off here by discarding 1 card. He's able to stand 1 regard and giving plus 10k to the unit, effectively opening a trigger. And looks like the aggression continues, but he does open 2 damage trigger here, and the aggression will be lightened here. But he does decide to eat the damage to 4 damage here, and the Magnolia player will actually hardcore the Grade 2. And without any personal right, this turn might be a bit weak, but he does open a critical trigger here, which will push the Bastion player to 5 damage. Power to the critical trigger, and he does check a Magnolia. And we do see a damage trigger at the 5th damage check, but Magnolia will pump the effect to the back row, which allows it to actually attack from the back row. And in this case, the Grade 2 is able to Soul Blast 1 plus 10k, so it's able to hit over the trigger, and more cards will be dropped, and actually Kanzens are actually forced out already. But we do see the Bastion player having another personal right, and this should be game, as the opponent is already at 4 damage, and he does use the Grade 3 to actually pump 10k to his own Grade 3 units, and his Dragon will be Soul Blasting again to give all unit boosts, in this case all the Grade 3, and the Grade 3s do get a very huge buff, or rather they are 15k buff each due to the Bastion ability, and a 45k guard will be thrown here for 2 to pass. He does stretch out a Grade 3 though, so a Grade 3 order does consider a Grade 3 for the Bastion skill to activate, allow him to actually withstand. And does swing again. Oh, but look at that, Magnolia actually survived that. I didn't actually expect it to survive. And he does go for his own personal right here, and this should be the change of event, whereby the Magnolia player will actually win. It looks like the 6 damage is not a heal, and this is game. Going 1-0-1 to the Magnolia player. And the second game will begin with Bastion going first once again, as he discard and riding to the Grade 1, passing the turn. And do note that the starters also changed compared to V series, whereby you do auto draw one where you ride over the starter. But now, given the new changes in this series, you actually only draw if you are going second. So actually a very nice balance, I would say. So the first player don't really get the most advantage, but going first in this game still is pretty strong due to that personal right. Looks like the Bastion player did superior call critical trigger there, which is pretty unfortunate, and that concludes his turn. And the Magnolia player was actually going for the superior call once again, and he does superior call the critical trigger, which is pretty classic, and he does call this sort of a new Nectar vibe card that calls the Great 1 from his soul. He does call the Great 2 Tiger here, and they do make pretty good columns. No guard here. Try checking into a Kanzen. Kanzen is always good against Bastion because Bastion do hit pretty hard, and they maximum only can do 4 attacks. And we do see the Bastion player eating a damage trigger here, but he does go to eat to 4 damage. But I think he might have a plan in mind to actually go for that 4th damage. Basically now he does have 4 counter blasts to work with, which he does so with the Great 3 Triple R here, which is super good as you are counter blasting 2, so blast 1, call a Great 3 and you are able to draw 2. And we see him actually abusing the 4 counter blasts that's given to him with the Great 3 order that's draw 2s again and plusing 5k. And do note that Bastion do have the Great 3 counter charges, so counter blast is technically almost always there. So they are able to afford these counter blast 2s, and the Bastion will swing at the Vanguard. Do see him crash checking a critical trigger and a Great 3. But the Magnolia do open a damage trigger there, but can he actually withstand the Bastion pressure? I honestly don't think so. As you can see, Bastion is just relentlessly attacking, pushing the Magnolia player to actually 5 damage, and he does counter charge 2 and so charge 2. So basically making that counter blast 4 turn effectively only a counter blast 2 turn. And the Magnolia do finally go to his Great 3 turn now, and we shall see how the turn play out. He does superior call the top card, which is the Great 1 Panda, which is pretty cute if you ask me, and does superior call, does call a Great 2 Bear from hand, and this Great 2 Bear does allow multi-batters to be more effective as it gives power. But the Bastion player to open a damage trigger there, and this turn will be turned pretty weak, I would say. As you guys can see, the Bear does give the power to the Great 2 Tiger there, which does have his own plus 5k buff, and will be forcing out shields from the Bastion player even though he did eat a damage trigger. Now, do we see a personal right here? And we do consistently see a superior right, or rather a personal right from the Bastion player, and I must say he's pretty talented. And thus, he does go for the triple R once again to actually counter blast 2 to call a Great 3 and so blasting 1 to draw 2. But unfortunately, he does forget to actually activate the Great 3 Dragon ability, which allows the boost to happen. But it doesn't matter because he does actually have the soul to actually commit. And looks like this game is already over, making it a 1-1 score. Now we do move on to game 3 with Magnolia player actually going first, which is a change of event, as it's able to go to his Great 3 turn first, which might change how the aggression will go. But the Kitten will be able to try check first, hitting to a critical trigger here to start off the game. Mad talent, I would say. And we shall see how the Magnolia player will actually return this critical trigger favor. And he does superior call a Great 2 here instead of a trigger from the previous 2 games. He does call the Great 2 once again, which allows him to actually superior call 1 unit from the drop zone after paying the cost. So he does choose the Mantis, I believe, calling it. It looks like he does give the buff to the front row. And now he'll be swinging the Great 2 here, and no guard, which opens a critical trigger, really returning that favor straight away. And the Great 2 will be swinging for 5k guard, and he does throw for 2 columns already. And how will the Great 2 turn play out for Kitten? Which I believe there's not much to do for them because they do have a lot of Great 3 in hand, but he does superior call Great 3 here, which will allow him to actually aim, going for the Vanguard here, going for the 5k intercept for 1 pass, and there's some ballsy move from the Magnolia player. And the intercept will go once again, leaving him with an empty field except for Mantis behind. But given that Magnolia does superior call quite easily, we shall see how the turn will play out. He does superior call himself, unfortunately. Magnolia, his dead list don't play the bounce the rear guard 2 back to hand, so he's not able to secure the personal right next turn. But if he does have a strong talent, he's able to draw it eventually anyway. So the Ground Mantis will be superior called, and you can see it's a full column already, or rather a full board, continuing his aggression, pushing the Bastion to 3 damage already. No guard for the Vanguard. And we do see a huge trigger which doesn't go off, but 10k power is always nice as he does pump to the Tiger behind. And Magnolia will give the Tiger a 5k buff and allowing it to attack from the back row. which is actually a 20k guard I think, and the over trigger will actually be dropped here. Man, over trigger is actually a interesting mechanic released in the game, and I do understand that not all players do appreciate how it will affect competitiveness because you can't actually play around it. But I guess Vanguard has always been a trigger game, so you know you can't play around triggers either way unless you have a Kanzen, I guess. And we shall see how the Bastion player will actually use out his Counter Blast with the Counter Blast 4 combo with the Great 3 order as well as the Triple R once again, refilling the mad hand size. But usually the hand size is just full of Great 3s as he does commit them down, and he's going to go for the Vanguard here. But he does use his Soul Blast for the Great 3 Dragon first, allowing them to be boosters. And the first column will be actually hitting for 30k power already, which is actually 20k guard. And given that there's no 20k shoes anymore in this game, 20k is actually 2 cards to guard, so it's actually pretty painful. He actually swinging with the right column first instead of swinging with the Vanguard, so a very interesting play by him, and I won't question him, as after all, he is the second place in Japan in 2019. And a turn 2 to pass here, opening a huge trigger, which does go off. It looks like he's going to be going all in, and he does open a critical trigger. Man, it doesn't need an over trigger at all. And we shall see how the Magnolia player will actually use magic tricks to actually come out with a potential miracle comeback, as he does open a 6 damage shield here. So man, this guy is just pushing the card. If you guys are not familiar, basically what he's doing is actually a very Chinese tradition, or rather Chinese culture, whereby in gambling or something like that, you actually do want to squeeze out your card, basically changing the card. So in this case, he did change the 6 damage to a huge trigger, but do understand that it's just a joke, so do not take it that he's actually changing the card itself. But as you guys can see, he still does it because he believes in the luck, and he does actually open a critical trigger here, which does push Bastion to 5 damage. And given that Magnolia does have his personal right buff here, he's able to give 3 more units in the back row, 3 more attacks, and there's 5 more attacks upcoming, and the Bastion does concede. Now let's talk about this Magnolia deck list. As you guys already know, DBTO1 is out, but Magnolia is actually a starter deck card, so it's very interesting to see Bushido actually buffing starter deck cards right off the bat for set 1. And I do appreciate them doing this because, you know, your boss unit doesn't face off immediately with power creep, or rather a stronger power creep card almost immediately. So let's take a look at the Great 3 counts. He does play 4, 1 being in the right deck and 3 being in the main deck, and currently you do play 4, even though you do secure the right either way, is for the personal right. So nothing to say much there, but Magnolia is actually a super strong card given that they superior call the top deck, and they allow back row attackers similar to Aqua Force abilities, which they did integrate it to the nation in itself pretty well if you ask me. And for the Great 2s, actually playing a pretty interesting count of 15, or rather 16 if you include the right deck, which is the 4 starter deck one, the 4 bears, the 4 Neo Nectar clone I would say, and 4 of the tiger. Oh, actually I do miss out on the Great 2 bugger, I guess, at the corner. So actually for DBTO1, there isn't really much Great 2s, or rather strong units for them to actually try out. So I'm still looking forward to DBTO2 to actually make deck list feel more interesting to build. And he's actually playing all the best cards currently available for Magnolia build specifically, so there's nothing going to be going wrong for that. And for the Great 1, he's actually playing 12, including the right deck itself, which is the 4 Great 1 Pandas, which does plus 5k when you attack from the back row, and the Great 1 Mantis, which does actually help the aggression, as you guys have already witnessed in his Rush Crush variant, which allows him to actually hit over the Great 2, even though he does go second. And the 4 Great 1 Kanzen, I must say Kanzens are always needed in Vanguard, I guess, because you know when things get a bit too much power through the triggers, Kanzen is always there to save the day. And he does play 8 critical triggers, 3 draw triggers, 4 heal, and especially that 1 overdress trigger. Over trigger. Now this over trigger for storage, I would say is actually one of the better ones, or even the underrated one, because it does perform all 4 effects in the game, which is the front, the draw, the heal, and the crit. So I wouldn't say this over trigger is actually any lacking, as some people might say that it's actually one of the least favorable ones. And so that's all for this deck list. Now we do move on to Kitten Sentry, which I believe is the tier 0 deck currently in the format because of how strong it is, given that whatever you drive check is just going to be good. So as you guys can see, for the grade 3s, it's a ridiculous amount of almost half the deck, aside from triggers and the Kanzens. But the grade 3 counts, he's actually playing pretty, I would say, interesting. But the staples are usually the 4 RRR, which does allow you to have draw power, the 4 Bastions. Actually, he's only playing 3 counter charges, which most people will actually play 4. He does play the 4 of the Going So and plus in 10k. He does play 3 orders, and 4 of the Medic Girl and 3 Dragons. But this special card that he's playing, which actually strikes off as interesting for me, which is the grade 3 OTT card, the Battle Sister one. Basically, it's when you try check a trigger, you're able to counter +2 to actually stand the unit. So, not too sure why he does play that, but it might have potential 5 attacks in one turn, so it might be good to actually forego. And for the grade 1s, it's actually playing just 4 Kanzens, because this deck do want to focus on try checking grade 3s or triggers, and it's gonna be a feels bad man when you do try check a grade 1 or a grade 2. Now for the triggers, which is pretty self-explanatory I guess, which is just 8 criticals, 3 draws, and 4 heals, and 1 over trigger. Now for over trigger, for Kitten Sentry specifically, given that they are grade 3 variant deck as of now, when you do open over trigger for the Kitten Sentry, you are basically giving yourself 6 dry check in that one turn, and you are able to plus so hard. And do note that Bastion ability don't require himself to actually do the dry check to stand your rear guards, so actually able to swing with your rear guard first, and then dry checking a grade 3 there, then restanding another unit if you do want so. Now thank you for watching till the end, and I do know that it's been quite a while since I last do my Vanguard video, but this series is finally here and I'm looking forward to actually cover more tournament games for this series. So if you guys do enjoy the content, do consider subscribing, dropping a like and a comment, and I'll appreciate all of them.